Oh, yeah.
Hey, hey.
So I need to see if I can hear these microphones.
Janie, Janie, Janie. Janie, Janie, Janie.
Your industry is critical to the United States. You're a fucking American.
Dude, you're mic'd up.
Am I actually?
Yes, yeah, Mike's.
This isn't on though.
questions are over, that's when you go out and you activate the QR code. That's when you provide us some feedback on, based on the 5 final presentations, who you think is the team that should have won and why. So we've got a couple of different groups that are here doing some different things. So that's the first message to all the students. For everybody, again, I don't think we can say this enough. You can't make a program like this happen without tremendous support. So I want to call out again, South 32, Vantage West Credit Union, the H.S. Lopez Family Foundation, Vanguard, and McGraw-Hill. How about a big round of applause? Big round of applause. And Mr. Zach is going to be our designated question.
Okay, so just a quick overview of how this is going to work. Our first team is UMass Amherst. They will have 10 minutes to present their recommendations and findings. When there's 1 minute left, you'll get a warning over here, so make sure you're watching this. If you hit the 10-minute mark, our student volunteers will stop you. After that, Mr. Zach will read you one question. You have 1 minute. As soon as he's finished reading the question, the 1 minute timer will start. You're free to huddle up, but that still counts as part of your 1 minute. Either of you can answer the question, and you will have a 10-second warning when your 1 minute is almost up. At the end of the 1 minute, you will be stopped. Clear? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, University of Massachusetts at Amherst.
Tell me to pull up the slide. Tell me to pull up my slide.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Can they hear from this?
I don't know.
Talk loud.
Is that working? Oh, no, this is for the live stream. You need this
Ah,
for the
okay.
auditorium.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for being here today. We want to talk to you about the railway to success and how you, the AAR, can steward a path forward for the rail industry. Your industry is critical to the United States. 40% of goods in the US are moved by freight. The freight industry has an economic output of over $200 billion, and nearly 4 jobs are created from every single rail job. And I'm Evan Stotsky,
I'm Jack McKinnon.
and we're the Eisenberg Innovation Consultants, and we're excited to present to you the AAR leadership team. We want to talk about our central ethical question. How can the AAR support its members to prioritize safety without sacrificing operational efficiency and long-term success? We need to consider our stakeholders first. The AAR has a role to steward the entire industry along with the larger rail economy and everyone who participates in it. We're going to talk you through our agenda. We're going to start with an overview of the industry before talking about our research and ending with our detailed recommendations.
Our research had 3 pillars: stewardship, along with transparency and trust. We found 3 preliminary options for you. You can maintain the course of limited regulation. The other side is adopting prescriptive-based regulations. However, finding the balance between them is how you're able to steward the industry forward and maintain your leadership with your role. You need to regulate yourself before someone who knows less regulates you, and you are one major accident away from this happening. This is why our train framework is based around performance-based regulations, innovation, and safety to maintain yourself as a leader in this industry, which Evan will touch on.
So let's talk about the industry. There's been lots of legislation over the last 100 years that has been passed and led to what happened in East Palestine in 2023. I want to talk about the Staggers Act of 1980. This deregulated the entire industry and increased profits, increased efficiency, decreased rates, and somehow at the same time decreased train accidents by 77%, proving that deregulation can improve safety along with efficiency and profits. Now, in 1993, precision scheduled railroading helped increase company efficiency, and that is now an industry standard that most use today. The AAR, as a leader in the industry, helps steward the safety practices with various measures, along with being an advocate for performance-based regulations. So why are performance-based regulations so important? Prescriptive regulation hurts innovation by crystallizing a certain moment of safety in time. It doesn't allow for new safety innovations, new safety developments to be adopted to railways as they can become safer because of that.
Let's talk about what happened in East Palestine on February 3rd, 2023. A Norfolk Southern train carrying various hazardous chemicals derailed, and from there, a large accident occurred. The largest part was the toxic chemicals that seeped into the environment, affecting the community, and most importantly, the first responders during, at the time, the industry standard of a controlled vent and burn. We did learn from it the preventive measures that can help prevent derailments. But what we really need to learn from it is what happens when derailments happen and the clear communication process that needs to happen between first responders, the community, and the employees of these companies. The reason why is the incident in East Palestine is not an anomaly for the industry. 3 derailments happen every day, and since 1975, there's been over 460 deaths and over 130,000 derailments. Your industry still has derailments since this large incident, and you need to be the leader in this space, which Evan will begin with our research.
So let's talk about this from an ethical perspective. Your mission statement as the AAR is to add value to the rail industry through safety, efficiency, and security. You need to balance your stakeholder interests of public safety on one hand and efficiency and profits on the other, and you can fulfill your mission by doing that. You can also fulfill your mission statement by focusing on stewardship and making sure you're not sacrificing safety, the environment, or the community for short-term financial gains. I also want to talk about legal. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 added regulation to the rail industry, and through that, most regulation is done at a federal level because of constitutional clauses like the Supremacy Clause and the Dormant Commerce Clause. And because of that, most action in the rail industry is done through Congress and also executive agencies. In 2023, in the wake of the East Palestine derailment, 19 states were considering legislation on rail safety. The states are crying out for action because there's nothing happening at a federal level. Now, there's so many settlements and litigation as a result of this East Palestine derailment. There's the $310 million cleanup costs, the $600 million class action settlement that could rise even higher, and that's not to mention various ongoing wrongful death lawsuits. There's a lawsuit from a puppy breeder, from a restaurant. There are security class action lawsuits from investors with safety concerns. We don't know what the cost of this derailment is going to be for Norfolk Southern. It could be much higher than we think today. The Railroad Safety Act of 2023 was introduced in response to the East Palestine disaster. It did not pass. It was reintroduced again in 2025, and it stalled out. Federal regulators are not passing legislation despite states wanting it to happen. Nothing is happening at the federal level.
So, to touch on our financial research, to look at your industry, it is consolidating. Union Pacific this summer announced looking to acquire Norfolk Southern. And from this, there's rumors of BNSF acquiring CSX. When companies merge, there's always safety concerns, and this is being extrapolated by a potential duopoly in transcontinental rail companies. Now, what these safety concerns come from, we need to also touch on the costs. Implementing safety regulations is going to cost a lot, but it's necessary, and the federal government recognizes this, allocating funds for increasing your rail infrastructure. Through this, increasing safety on the rails has economic benefits. The less derailments from increased safety causes less time when the rails are shut down. In East Palestine, the rails were shut for 2 days, and Evan touched on the economic impact that the rail industry has. As he also touched on, the litigation that comes from not acting is high, but for the investor side, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty from litigation, uncertainty on the economic impacts, and uncertainty on the social. There's one thing investors dislike, it's uncertainty. And we're seeing this through the board activism that has happened recently with your major member companies. There's been CEO shakeups, different board makeups, and this is looking to prioritize safety as they've clearly stated both in this and also in annual shareholder meetings. Finding a balanced approach is financially responsible for your industry. Your companies need to have clear paths that give investors confidence and it allows your local communities to be safe and maintain the overall rail economy. So let's touch on our recommendations. We want to help you get on track for a culture of safety, and it starts with our train framework. Again, it's performance-based regulations, innovation, and safety. It starts with training your organization. You need to make real change in creating and maintaining a culture of safety from the top down in all your member companies. It's training your employees to report any safety concerns, having various means for them to be able to report it, and having a board that allows action to be done. It's as simple as creating a flyer with a QR code that allows you to prevent accidents.
We think that you should regulate yourselves voluntarily. What that looks like is creating a regulatory regime on your standards and showing that you are a leader for the industry and you can be trusted by all stakeholders as a steward of it. What that looks like is we recommend that you adopt the NTSB recommendations that they issued in the report following the East Palestine disaster. We also think that you should adopt various safety measures that make sense as they were directly related to the East Palestine derailment, including hot bearing detector regulation, along with redefining high hazardous flammable trains. The actionable step you can take tomorrow as the AAR is to create a certificate of safety that you award to companies that adopt your safety measures.
We want your industry to always be innovating. During a time of self-regulation, you need to have innovation as there's emerging technologies that can allow for increased efficiency but maintain a high standard of safety. Your subsidiary, the MXV Rail, and their strategic research initiative will be critical in this. They have consistently provided development and testing on materials, resources, and any safety precautions, and we want the member companies to work closely with them.
You want to intersect the AAR, its member companies, and the government. What this looks like is collaboration and communication. We think you should have quarterly meetings with legislatures and relevant committees in Congress and also the White House to communicate what your safety standards are, and also working with Congress to codify your performance-based regulations into law.
Our last recommendation is the long-term strategy for the AAR, navigating a consolidating industry. Your data collection needs to transition from voluntary to mandatory, as during this time, you need to be a leader in data collection to be a leader in safety. And so with that, we want to recap. Our train is balancing performance-based regulations and safety.
Our great leaders have understood the importance of the rail industry, and we know you do too. Thank you, and we're now open to questions. Like, just so we're close, so we can.
All right, and your one question.
Identify 6 tangible actions the rail industry could support to regain trust in communities such as East Palestine, Ohio.
Yeah, hot bearings. Do you want to do the technical side? And you do this. Do you want to start and do the technical and I'll end it with long-term stuff?
There's many things that the rail industry can do to regain the trust of the community and everyone involved. You can start with, from a technical perspective, of adopting the NTSB recommendations. You can also mandate hot bearing detectors 15 miles in between them and other various hot bearing detector regulation. You can also redefine the high hazardous flammable train to make sure that all chemicals that are toxic and flammable are included in the definition.
More than just technical, it's about the emotional side. As Evan mentioned, there's wrongful death, there's puppies dying. You need to have a clear communication strategy that shows the people of East Palestine that this is more than just increased costs for Norfolk Southern. It's something that affected the community, and we will never know how long the effects will be for them.
You can do the PDF. Yeah.
So those microphones are for our live stream. Separate microphones for this room. So that's what these are.
Okay, they're on.
They're on. If not, just switch them.
Oh, sorry. I'll go.
University of Texas at Austin.
Good afternoon. My name is Lucy.
And my name is Reem.
And we are Ethos Strategies Group. And we're here in front of you today to present our recommendations for how the Association of American Railroads should move the industry forward. For a little bit of background, we're talking about this because of the train derailment in 2023 from Norfolk Southern's train in East Palestine, Ohio. On February 3rd, 2023, 38 of their freight cars derailed, 11 of which carried hazardous materials which ignited and released toxic vapors. Upon further investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board actually found that this incident was 100% preventable, and they listed 4 key causes, all of which could have been prevented with more proactiveness and more preparation.
Now, as one might imagine, an event of this scale came with tremendous costs for all the actors involved, especially Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern had to pay a whopping $2.1 billion, which included the environmental remediation costs, the settlement of class action lawsuits, legal fees, among a number of other factors. So now that we have this context in mind, let's talk about our problem. Lucy, can you tell us a bit about that?
Of course. So with our problem, the way we can look at it is with this spectrum. You have safety on one side and profitability on the other side. And our problem at hand is, how does the railroad industry balance safety with profitability?
So on the left-hand side of the spectrum, we have safety, and that is the prioritization of lives, well-being, and health above all else, with little regard to profit. And on the right-hand side, we have profitability, and that is the prioritization of capital, resources, with little regard to no regard of safety. And this matter isn't as black and white as it may seem. Profitability isn't necessarily unethical, as the livelihood of many different stakeholders depend on the profitability of these firms.
So currently, the public views the railroad industry as on the side of profitability, where you can see Norfolk Southern has, especially after the East Palestine derailment. We are recommending our solutions to move the AAR in the railroad industry closer to that question mark that balances safety and profitability, but leaning a little bit more towards safety since the lives of humanity matter most. But how are we going to create practical solutions to get there? Reem, could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so to tackle this huge problem, we've developed a 3R framework. Number 1, we have regulation. How can we minimize and completely prevent derailments in the future?
With our second R, reputation, we're looking at how we can restore the public's trust and repair the broken reputation of the railroad industry.
And the third R, recovery, in the instance of if these accidents occur again, how can we swoop in to control the scene before disasters can compound as it did in East Palestine, Ohio?
So let's jump right into our first R, regulation. We utilize a utilitarian framework that maximizes the greatest good for the greatest number, inherently maximizing safety.
So we've developed 4 different regulations, and the main ones I want to touch on is number 1, the .111 phase out. Initially, the Department of Transportation said that we should complete phase out of these cars by 2025, but due to intense lobbying pressures from the railroad industry, Congress was then pressured to push it back to 2029. But we want the railroad industry to take a step forward and say safety isn't something that has to be mandated upon us, and move that timeline back to 2027. That brings us to our 4th regulation, and that is mandating that every single company discloses their lobbying expenditures for the year. In 2024, it was a whopping $26 million of resources that went to lobbying against these safety regulations. And by disclosing this, we can successfully deter further use of resources to these measures.
Now, we know that these are kind of 4 blanket regulations, and every railroad firm is a little bit different, whether it's financial performance, financial burdens, or other variable factors. So we want to provide a bit of flexibility so that profitability is still in the question and we can balance it. So we recommend the safety efficiency test, which is an assessment that looks at what the company's risk level would be at after any kind of regulatory deviation or cost-cutting measure. As long as they remain below this minimum risk threshold, they are still maximizing safety while balancing the potential for staying profitable, ensuring that their employees still have jobs.
Now we move on to our second R, reputation, and we adopt a virtuous ethical framework when taking a look at this. So how can we present our right image to the public to restore this reputation through demonstrating virtuous character and transparency?
So the first way we're going to enhance transparency is through data sharing. So the AAR currently has a subsidiary called RailLink that sells software as a service, which is a data operational system to member railroads. So these railroads already use this service and have their operational data in it. And what we're proposing is to create a public interface called the National Rail Safety Data Repository that will have all of this operational data from wheel bearing failures to freight materials to incident data that the companies can opt in to provide on this public interface so that anyone who wants to access to see how rail operations are doing and stay in the loop about it can do so, whether that's regulators, investigators, local responders, or even the public. And this is very feasible since RailLink already has the plethora of data. All they need to do is invest a little bit more money to create a public user interface that people can go on and get companies to opt in with probably like the AAR's peer pressure.
So on top of demonstrating this transparency, we also want to show a tangible linking and change in our incentives, and that is through linking executive compensation pay towards the results of safety metrics as verified by an independent AAR audit committee. And we take precedence of this fact from a similarly stigmatized sector, which is the public energy sector, in which over 90% of companies link EHS metrics towards executive pay. And by doing so, we show this tangible movement of our motivation from just growth and profit, as executives are usually paid on, to the safety metrics and the priority that we want it to become.
Thanks, Reem. Let's move on to the third R now, which is recovery. So with recovery, we use a deontological framework where we look at the duty of railroad companies to help a local community respond and recover after causing any kind of harm or incident in their area. So the way we're going to do this is by being very proactive and prepared in case of the next train derailment. Because even with all of our regulations, we can't 100% guarantee that there's never going to be a train derailment again. So in that scenario, we need to be prepared for that. So we are proposing an emergency response and recovery fund. This is going to be a fund that member railroads who contribute to it can draw on to fund any kind of response in the first initial 72 hours of the incident. So how this is also modeled after the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, which is, because oil spills are also equally as dangerous to the environment and the local communities, and quick action is key there as well. So we're going to have Class 1 railroads contribute 0.05% of their annual revenue to this fund. We're projecting that to be about $50 million a year. Class 2 railroads have the option to contribute, and if they don't have access to the fund. Within just 2 years, we'll have our target fixed amount of $100 million that anyone who contributes to the fund can draw upon. And afterwards, after they get the incident handled, they're going to be able to pay back that amount so that our fund always stays at $100 million.
So because railroads are continuing to pay this annual amount to the fund, we are bound to have excess funds, which we recommend go towards organizations that help support and provide resources for responders. And as the National Transportation Safety Board stated in their analysis of the East Palestine, Ohio case, that the reason the damage was at the large scale that it was and wasn't able to be controlled as it should have was because the state of the volunteer firefighters of Ohio were simply not trained enough and did not have the necessary resources to step in and control the environment. So we recommend investing in programs such as TransCare that develops and trains local responders, as well as programs that help share information about railroads and local firefighter groups. So now that we've developed our 3R framework, let's take a quick recap. Number one, we had regulation in which we maximize the safety for the most amount of people. Number two, we had our reputation in which we demonstrated the character through initiatives to demonstrate transparency. And number three, recovery. How do we swoop in and ensure damage is minimized?
So going back to that safety profitability spectrum we had before, remember the railroad industry currently leans more towards profitability, and we're trying to bring it over to the safety side while still balancing profitability. With our 3R framework, where we improve regulations, repair the reputation of the industry, and make a bigger impact on recovery, we can ultimately bring the railroad industry to where we want it on the spectrum. So we're changing safety from just a compliance requirement to a shared moral commitment. And with this 3Rs framework, we believe that AAR can build a more ethical and sustainable future for the railroad industry.
Thank you for your time. We're open to questions.
you, Austin. Our question from our judge over here.
Identify 6 tangible actions the rail industry could support to regain trust in communities such as East Palestine, Ohio.
So our 6 initiatives are each of the 2 action items in our 3 Rs. So the first is stronger regulations. We know that AAR can't necessarily enforce these regulations, but it's good to have this governing body to set better standards. The second would be a safety efficiency test, so that in the future, any cost-cutting measures, the community will know is below a minimum risk level. The third one would be having more transparency within the industry that restores the community's trust. If they want to see how many incidents have occurred or how many failures have occurred, they have the ability to do that. The fourth would be tying executive compensation to safety, and this ultimately makes sure that the community and the executives of the companies are on the same page about safety. And fifth, we have our recovery fund that allows for the community to know that the railroad industry, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
For your
you.
little,
$1.2 billion was the cost to Norfolk Southern after the train derailment in East Palestine. As a result of this, it brings us to a critical question. Following the train derailment in East Palestine, how does the railroad industry effectively manage the interest of its stakeholders and the communities, employees, and the environment? I'm Alex, and I'm joined by my colleague, Emily. Now, to break down what we're going to discuss, we're going to first start off with a dual approach to how we're addressing the issue with an ethical framework. Then we're going to dive into a digital twin infrastructure with some of the key metrics that we're going to be impacting our over 2 international partnerships, decreasing our costs by 40%, increasing our revenue 10%, but most importantly, saving lives. On February 3rd, 2023, a 1.5-mile-long train in East Palestine derailed, littering 600,000 gallons of hazardous material across the backyards of these communities. The National Transportation Safety Board noted that a sensor went off 17 miles before the train actually derailed, leaving the situation to be 100% preventable. The immediate consequences following this were mass evacuations, environmental catastrophe, and a controlled burn to prevent a catastrophic explosion. The ongoing fallout continues just beyond this $1.2 billion sticker price that Norfolk Southern can just brush off. In fact, the market capitalization of Norfolk Southern was reduced $11 billion, or 20%, over the next 3-month time period when the market stayed flat, leading to the push for the Railway Safety Act of 2023. Now, to dive into our ethical framework, we're going to provide some context. Ever since 1985 to today, the amount of trains that have been derailing have stayed relatively constant, even though AI and technology are getting better and better every single day, and every other industry is able to make a positive impact. And now, to put this number into perspective, there are about 3 to 4 train derailments that are happening every single day. And the impact of this is staggering. Approximately once every 2 months, there's a train that derails that litters over 1,000 gallons of hazardous material across the communities due to cost-cutting, a focus on operational efficiency, and a disregard for human safety. Now, to break down our ethical framework, we're going to look at this through two lenses. We're going to first focus on rights-based ethics to consider the most basic human rights to ensure that we're operating in accordance with that. And additionally, we're going to take a pragmatic approach that is able to ensure that what we're implementing is actually feasible, creating human rights-based pragmatism.
Now, we need to understand why exactly derailment happen. This is due to the industry's core business model, precision scheduled railroading, or PSR. PSR can be broken down into two key components, those being operating fewer but longer and heavier trains, and then running these trains on a tighter schedule. This has some pros and cons to it. So while on the pro side, we see that it's pragmatically successful in driving down operating ratios, at the same time, because these trains are longer and heavier, they're a lot harder to control and inspect. Also, they exert a lot more force on the tracks themselves, making this infrastructure more prone to failure. Another component of PSR is cutting down the railway workforce. So that means that the employees who are left over have additional burden, and that is no surprise because human error is now the main cause of derailments in the United States. Next, I'd like to take a look at where exactly derailments happen. The majority of derailments happen in rail yards where they're moving about 5 miles per hour and there's very limited impact. The ones we want to focus on are the remaining 26% of derailments that occur on main lines. These ones are high-speed, high-impact catastrophes like what happened in East Palestine. They run through communities, often carrying hazmat materials. And what we see is that the average train line derailment costs about $300,000, but one incident like East Palestine can cost billions. And that has caused the legal and regulatory framework to completely shift in the United States. We've seen a push for more training for emergency responders. The Railway Safety Act of 2023 and the Clean Water Act is being enforced more heavily. So if any single train derails and spills into waterways, that means that it opens the door to EPA regulations as well as fines. You might be wondering, given all these risks, why do we not have better technology to prevent the problem from happening? We see that we have a network of thousands of sensors across the US, but this sensor network is flawed. These sensors are spaced too far apart, they're miles apart, and that means that if problems occur in the middle, they're unable to be caught. We also see that these sensors are processing many different types of data that aren't consolidated. And while other industries have started to implement AI and other technologies that we'll touch on later, the railway industry is falling behind. We see the very real impacts on our environment and the contamination of air, soil, and water, as well as on the people themselves. We see that an NIH survey conducted after the East Palestine incident saw the majority of residents experience some sort of physical or psychological harm. And when we take a step back and consider all of these pieces together, what we see is that we're hurting our communities, the workers are being overworked, nature is being destroyed, and while shareholders may see short-term returns, at the end of the day, we're creating a lot of risk for billion-dollar incidents like East Palestine. And that is the ethical problem that our recommendation will solve.
Our recommendation takes into account 5 different decision criteria. The first 2 focus on a human rights perspective. We're focusing on how do we actually prevent future derailments, and then additionally, what do we do if and when these trains do derail? The following 3 focus on feasibility, at speed, and ensuring that we actually restore public trust to ensure our pragmatic lens is considered. Now, if we take a look, we created 4 different recommendations that we could possibly use under this framework. Let's take a look. Under regulations, we note that the speed of implementation and the feasibility simply just is not there. Let me remind you, the Clean Water Act of 2023, the Clean Water Enhancement Act of 2024, and the Clean Water, or the Railroad Protection Act of 2025 all failed. They have not been able to go through due to the regulatory feasibility. Additionally, looking at if we are able to upgrade every single sensor, we might be able to decrease the number of trains that are actually derail. However, but when and if they do derail, we have no response. Now, for employee training, we are not able to effectively be able to implement this, especially given the circumstances that our employees are already so overworked, leaving digital transformation having all check marks. So let's break down what a digital transformation would actually look like. This, in our view, would be a digital twin that connects the physical infrastructure in the railroad system with a digital copy that has a 3D model of what is currently happening in the rail system. We will be able to do this through integrating sensors, satellites, and the Internet of Things to be able to ensure that we are able to accurately understand accurately predict and understand what our trains will do before harm actually takes place. Then the impact of this, there's currently emulation and simulation occurring in the railroad industry under a digital framework. But the one thing that the railroad industry is failing to do currently is we're failing to take the data that we're receiving and actually make an impact. Now let's apply this to the case of East Palestine, before, during, and after. Before it would happen, the train would be able to be derailed 17 miles before the train derailed in the end. And then during, we would be able to help first responders be able to create a containment when the train does derail. And then after, we'd be able to learn from the situation and be able to ensure that it does not happen again. And then this implementation would be very feasible because we already have the data and we just need to apply it.
This brings us to our implementation. We propose this 3-step implementation plan across the short, medium, and long term. In the short term, we need to establish this digital foundation. We need to mobilize companies under the AAR and then also establish knowledge-sharing partnerships with other countries such as the Netherlands, Germany, Canada, Australia, and many others that have already established robust digital twin models. From there, we're going to standardize that data and then feed it to train this AI model. We also want to pilot this program in a couple of key states. We use 3 decision criteria to pick which states we want to use, those being the states with the highest mileage of railroads, the most hazmat cargo, and the most number of derailments happening in them. After looking at this data from the Bureau of Transportation, we identified that California, Texas, and then Illinois were the best options to go with because they have the highest number of hazmat cargo passing through them and the highest number of derailments. From there, we want to expand out into regional networks, with California covering the Pacific Northwest, Texas covering the Gulf and Southeast, and then Illinois covering the Midwest and the rest of the Northeast. And then after that, we will expand those geographical gaps and then finally create a truly unified and automated digital twin system.
Now, when we take a look at the impact of our solution, it's important that we are able to consider the financial and safety risks. We note that the projected costs are able to be saved if we save just one East Palestine. We're saving $1.2 billion, and we note that in other countries, they've been able to have 0 track-related derailments due to their digital twin structure. Now, when we take a look at other stakeholders, first off, our community. When we look at our community, we notice that we save these rights. For the nature, we're saving these. For employees, and then for shareholders, but we're doing this through preventing train derailments happening in the first place. Now, to consider our risks and mitigations, first we have financial, but we notice that there's short-term operating.
All right, thank you. Your one question will come from Mr. Jerry Zhao.
Wait, do you want to stand together?
1 minute.
Identify 6 tangible actions the rail industry could support to regain trust in communities such as East Palestine.
Digital twins, occupational safety.
I would break it down into digital twins and then just like in general.
Look at this, we want to break it down into our digital twin structure and then into the overall rail industry. So first, our digital twins would be able to stop derailments from happening in the first place. We would be able to release safety ports with this and have an online data registry that would be able to improve to be able to be more public about what is happening. Furthermore, we would be able to implement safety protocols in those reports. And additionally, one of the key things that are happening in the rail industry is that these companies aren't actually showing up to their community programs. So for example, in East Palestine hosted two different town halls, and Norfolk Southern failed to show up both times. So if we can make sure that we're showing up to those events and really making sure that we're helping our community through these impacts.
Take your mics and take your lapel mics. University.
Hi, my name is Mia Cochran,
And my name is Nikita Donti.
and we are Parallel Consulting here today to advise the AAR on how to move forward when faced with at the crossroads between profit and safety. Now, first, we want to dive into the situation that brought us here today, specifically the East Palestine derailment. So the East Palestine derailment had two key causes. The two key causes that we want to talk about today were the overheating of the wheel bearing that led to a derailment, and additionally the communication of these alerts to various different groups, both on the train and off the train. Now, specifically in the East Palestine derailment, the train crew did not receive an alert until 2 minutes prior to derailment. This is an issue because the train crew did not have enough time to stop the train before derailment and caused a huge spill of the vinyl chloride gas in the East Palestine community. Now, we also want to look at the response of the East Palestine derailment. In this situation, a vent and burn was conducted, and this has a significant impact on the community. This is because it releases toxins. Additionally, experts suggest that the vent and burn decision should not be conducted unless it is the only reasonable option to exist. This raises the concerns that were raised in East Palestine. This is because Norfolk Southern, the company involved in the derailment, convinced Ohio officials to go forward with the vent and burn decision. However, experts suggested that this was not necessary due to the threat of explosion not being a necessary result. Additionally, the community had no say in the decision that had a great impact on their environment.
Now that we've understood what were the general responses to the East Palestine incident, we can also talk about the legal responses in specific. So the legal responses included several key lawsuits that were filed by different government bodies. Also, on a more private level, the residents of East Palestine and affected business owners filed a class action lawsuit against Norfolk Southern. This was one of the largest lawsuits and resulted in a $600 million settlement, which is one of the largest settlements in railroad history. I also want to draw your attention to the policy reforms. After the derailment, there were several reforms that were being discussed in the government. One of them was the Railway Safety Act, which would have brought significant changes. However, this remains stalled in Congress. And with such key acts remaining stalled, the burden now falls on the AAR to move the industry forward after the derailment. And that leads us to our guiding question. How should the freight rail industry move forward after the East Palestine derailment? And under this, there are several key trade-offs that we want to consider. Firstly, understanding low probability versus high impact accidents, then understanding human oversight versus technology conflicts, and then individual interest versus communal interest conflicts.
Now that we understand these key questions, we need to understand how we evaluate them. And the first way to do this is understand the stakeholders in the freight railroad industry. We have these stakeholders listed here. However, what we want to highlight is the first two listed, the Class 1 railroad executives and the shareholders, look at the industry through a financial lens. Their goal of the freight rail industry is to maximize profits and demand returns. Now, when we look at the bottom of this list, the public and environment stakeholders, they look at the industry through an equitable lens. They want to promote the safety of the operations of the freight rail industry and also protect the resources in which these companies operate in. Now, we evaluated the Class 1 railroads' behavior, performance, and impact over the course of the last few years to understand if these objectives have been met by the freight railroad industry. We found that executives and shareholders, their objectives were consistently surpassed, showing high, strong financial returns and additionally operational efficiency. However, when you look at the public environment, their objectives are consistently missed. And in the case of East Palestine derailment, are harmed because safety, transparency, and the commitment to the environment were put at a lower priority when compared to the priority of maximizing profit. Now, we want to understand the importance of this stakeholder prioritization. And in order to do this, we can look at some case examples in history, specifically the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. This company placed their stakeholders of the public and environment last, and this resulted in reputational damage of the company, additionally resulting in a 55% loss in shareholder value that the company has still not recovered from to this day. When applied to the freight railroad industry, who has seen already criticism of their own culture of safety, we can understand that these key stakeholders, the public and environment, need to be prioritized in order to avoid economic loss.
Now, with those objectives in mind, we can move forward with our ethical considerations. To guide the AAR, we have chosen the communitarianism ethical framework. Essentially, one of the definitions of this framework is that it should be balancing individual rights with the commitments to the common good. And in the case of our industry, this means balancing the profits versus the interests of the public and the environment. There are several key principles of communitarianism that have a strong relationship to the freight rail industry. So for example, public protection, which holds that the public and the environment should be protected. Then responsible oversight, meaning that organizational operations should not impact the environment and the public negatively. Then civic engagement, meaning that the public should have a voice in the industry. And then collective governance, meaning that there should be community-guided decision-making. With these 4 key principles to guide us, we can now answer the guiding question that we had posed. And our answer is that the freight rail industry should balance profit with their commitment to the common good. Now, having understood this theory, we can start to guide the AAR with their strongest recommendations moving forward.
We recommend that the AAR implement recommendations following those 4 communitarian principles that we just outlined today. Let's first dive into the first recommendation following public protection, the first communitarianism principle. This public protection recommendation is to distribute hazardous materials across the freight train length. Well, we want to look into what is the current freight train length. Currently, all Class 1 railroads report running longer trains after implementing precision scheduled railroading. Now, this increase in length does come with a decrease of benefits, but the issue that we want to highlight here is that when a longer train derails, this increases the greater chance of a hazmat car derailing, thus increasing the chance of a negative impact on the community. So overall, our objective here is to reduce the risk of a hazmat car derailing without reducing the benefits that long freight trains bring. That brings us back to our solution of distributing hazardous material along the course of a long freight train. And our example here is that the AR should implement a policy of maximum cluster or cut size of 3 for all U.S. Department of Transportation hazardous materials, thus balancing profit with safety. Now, moving to our second recommendation of responsible oversight, this recommendation follows that the AAR standardize the alert handling system. Currently, the AAR has already made changes to standardize the system, which we have highlighted here. However, what we want to touch on is that even with these current changes, that in the context of the East Palestine derailment, this would not have changed the result of a derailment in the effects of the chemical spills on East Palestine. This is because the train crew still would have received an absolute alert only 2 minutes prior to derailment. This leads us to our recommendation of greater oversight, where we recommend that all Class 1 railroads receive trending warm alerts to train crews specifically on hazmat rail cars. This will prevent the East Palestine derailment, specifically because the train crew will receive a trending warm alert 41 minutes before the derailment, and giving them ample enough time to stop the train before a derailment occurs.
Now, our next solution is to implement a citizen advisory board. Within the AAR, currently the voices include railroads and other businesses, but the voice that is missing is the local community. And to solve this, we suggest having a citizen advisory board. Now, within the citizen advisory board, we could have residents of the local communities, local environment experts, etc., and they could add in a new perspective in the AAR. The reason we believe this would be successful is because it has been successful in other industries in the past. For example, the PWS RCAC was established after the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and this has been hailed as a best practice within the oil industry. And so we believe a similar board could bring value to the freight rail industry as well. Now we can talk more about our remedial action decision process, which is our fourth and final recommendation. Now, at the moment, this is our current decision-making timeline that Mia touched upon earlier, but we suggest that there are additional steps that are added in order to make the decision-making process more holistic, and in order to ensure that what happened in the case of East Palestine doesn't happen again. So to dive a bit deeper, we suggest that when there is a remedial action to be taken, that the community town hall is conducted quicker. This can be the responsibility of the Citizen Advisory Board, and their inputs can be given to the local incident commanders. Similarly, the AAR should set a standard, asking companies to have non-biased evaluators during the remedial action-making process. And so this results can be communicated to the local incident commander before a final decision is made.
Now, finally, we want to highlight that our recommendation follows all 4 communitarian principles and prioritizes those key stakeholders, the public and in the environment.
And finally, just want to talk upon the financial impact or our economic considerations. Over here, you can see that our 4 recommendations have 4 different costs. Some of them can be borne directly by the Class 1 railroads, others can be borne by the AAR and then split in the form of extra dues. We want to say that over here, you can see that the $6.9 million would be the total cost incurred per company per year, but that is very small compared to what a company incurs in the case of a derailment, because in East Palestine, Norfolk Southern had to pay $1.9 billion. We suggest that by implementing our recommendations, which reduce the risk, severity, and the financial risk of a derailment, companies would be able to consider this almost as an insurance premium. This insurance premium is just 0.4% of the cost that they pay in an accident, so why not? These insurance premiums are much less than what you and I pay on a regular basis. By implementing these recommendations, the railroad industry will be able to move forward in a much more sustainable way. Thank you.
And your question will come from Mr. Jerry Zach over there with the microphone.
Identify 6 tangible actions the rail industry could support to regain trust in communities such as East Palestine, Ohio.
Yes, so to answer your question of the 6 recommendations that the railroad industry should implement to build trust back in the industry are 4 of the following recommendations that we suggested today. The first being standardizing the alert decision-making process to prevent derailments. That's a preventative response. Another preventative response we believe that is also necessary is distributing those hazardous materials to decrease the risk. And then also responsive recommendations. These responsive measures would be creating a citizen advisory board to give voice to those communities, and also standardizing the guidelines to increase the amount of voice of the community in the community. However, the 2 key areas that we didn't touch on that we should also implement is transparency and honesty of the AAR. So continuing to update the freight rail industry of the recommendations being implemented and being honest with the community in which it impacts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final team from Penn State University.
This is what East Palestine looked like on February 3rd, 2023. Destruction, flames, and toxic smoke filled the air as a Norfolk Southern train derailed. The train derailed because Class 1 railroads take a non-strategic, reactive approach to safety culture, responding to external pressures rather than embedding safety at their core.
And this is why it's more important than ever to go beyond the bottom line. We'd like to thank you, the Association of American Railroads, for being here today as we talk about how you can build a safety-first future for freight rail. We are Track Consulting. My name is Brenna Bohr.
And I'm Palmer Moore.
And today, we'll be walking you through so that you can develop an understanding of the problem, how freight railroad companies can build a preventative culture, what you can do to support it, how you can implement it, and then finally, we'll walk through some key takeaways. So starting with understanding our problem, we have to know what you, the AAR, do in the industry. You are the trade union that represents North American railroad companies. Your purpose is to promote safety and efficiency within the industry. You do this by doing policymaking in Washington, D.C., setting standards, doing industry insights through a subsidiary, and then doing research and developing new technologies. And when we look at our key stakeholders, you are kind of the glue that ties them all together. We have our railroad companies that are in charge of everyday operations, Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. And then we also have our railroad employees that are the boots on the ground. These are the people where if a derailment were to occur, their livelihood and well-being is on the line. And whenever talking to railroad employees, we also need to keep in mind that we have to communicate with employee unions. On behalf of these 3 stakeholders, you, the AAR, speak with regulators like the Federal Railroad Administration and the Surface Transportation Board to ensure that policy is actually helping the industry. If any line in this tree were to snap, ultimately a derailment could occur, and that could ultimately negatively impact local communities, which is not what we want. So now I'm going to pass things off to Palmer so he can go over proactive safety.
Thank you, Brenna. So when we look at the railroad industry, right now, there is a reactive culture. companies take an issue that happens and work on solving that, but they don't look ahead to the future. So as we work towards proactive safety, we've broken it down into 3 areas. The first is technology, which railroad companies actually do a really good job with. In response to East Palestine, per year, companies spend an average of $23 billion on upgrading infrastructure and building new technologies. So they're really good on this quote of fixing the problem. But the issue with proactive is that there's 2 other components. There are people and process. For people, the value of safety is prioritized by Class 1 companies, but it doesn't go down through their value chain. Employees don't feel it in their day-to-day operations. Then, on the process side, there aren't great systems within these Class 1 railroad companies for individuals to report a close call incident that could prevent an issue from ever coming up. So while they do well in fixing the problem, what the industry is missing is noticing and addressing it before something like East Palestine happens in the first place. Now, as we look at the issue, in response to East Palestine, Congress asked the Federal Railroad Administration to conduct safety culture assessments on the major 6 Class 1 railroads here in the US. The first 2, Canada National and Canada Pacific Kansas City, have not finished their surveys yet, but they're known in the industry to have pretty good safety cultures. Then we look at the 4 who have started, and then 1 who hasn't finished their safety assessments. BNSF leads the pack at 3.5 out of 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, and then Norfolk Southern and CSX are at 3 out of 5. While these are above average, the goal on this matrix is for them to be closer to a 4.5 towards a 5, showing that there's still room for growth in the industry. Then I want to touch on Union Pacific here, where they're marked with a DNF. This means did not finish. The FRA stopped their assessment because they found that company executives were curating answers for lower-level employees so that their results could be tainted and look better than what they actually are. And so this proves, when we put these numbers into context, that companies who have better safety cultures, those like CPKC, BNSF, and Canada National, they have less accidents per million miles, which factors in size. But then a company like Union Pacific, who's intentionally tampering with what's going on in their assessments, well, no shock, they're at the top of this list with the most accidents happening. And so why this is so important is that this shows that there are risks if culture doesn't change. Not only are you harming key stakeholders, but you can continue to have financial problems for your business. So now I'll pass it back to Brenda to talk about how we can actually build this culture of prevention within Class 1 railroads.
Thank you, Palmer. I want to tie it back to our 3-prong equation: people, process, and technology. Like we said, the industry is doing very well with the technology portion. After the East Palestine derailment, a lot of companies, especially Norfolk Southern, made sure that they were adding more hot wheel bearing detecting sensors, autonomous vehicles, things like that. But when we look at preventative culture as a whole, people and processes are still needed to improve. We need to make sure that employees are understanding what safety is and why it's important, and also that they have a process to report it. So going through, our solution is to set new culture standards, and this is a 3-pronged solution. First, we'd like you to use the FRA's confidential close call reporting system. 2, create financial incentives for safety. And 3, conduct continual culture assessments. This is what we want the freight railroads companies to do, but ultimately we will go through how you can support this as the AAR. So first, jumping into the C3RS system, this is already in existence and it's run by the FRA. The way it works is employees submit a close call. What a close call incident is it's any breach in safety that could have caused accident or injury, but didn't necessarily. So if a rail car were to get away and run through a passenger intersection and it didn't hit anything, that doesn't need to be reported. Whereas if a car were in the way, that could have left an injury or death. So we want to make sure that the railroad companies are learning from this. So once employees submit that close call, it is classified by a neutral third party, and then the FRA and peer review team are able to address this issue and give a report to the railroad companies. And what we're doing here is ultimately creating a virtuous cycle. The way that it works is an employee reports a close call incident, and the FRA is able to give findings to a company. The company is then able to learn from this where before they wouldn't, and then create safer operations. Employees are now working in a safer environment and understand that their word means something, making them more likely to report again in the future, thus continuing this cycle. And the way that we know that this works is the aviation industry has been doing this since 1976. They have a confidential close call reporting system that has caught things like lithium-ion batteries. If you ever go to the airport and they ask if you have any in your bag, that's because an employee found that they could catch fire. And instead of that catching fire in the passenger part of a plane, they made it so that it could only go in cargo. So that's an amazing example of how this virtuous cycle works in practice. Now I'm going to pass things off to Parminder to go through the second and third prongs of our solution.
So we understand in large organizations that what gets rewarded gets done and what gets punished gets avoided. So if we want safety to be the focus, we need to reward it. And that starts at the top by upping executive pay and linking it directly to safety. We want railroad companies to have their executives paid 20% of their compensation based on safety outcomes. We also recognize that you can start culture from the bottom up as well, and so we want to create a total reward program for our employees to make sure that they're thinking about safety day to day. So if they meet safety outcomes year over year, we want them to receive a 3% bonus of their pay to incentivize them to continue through this. Now, the third part is that we understand for organizations as well, what you want to manage, you need to be able to measure. And so if we're going to keep talking about culture and creating a change, it's not something that those of us in this room today can do one time and it solves the problem. It's a continual process. And so the industry needs to keep tracking what culture is and how it changes. We want companies to partner with a third party to measure culture and then publish these reports to hold them accountable both to investors as well as the industry more broadly. Now I'll pass it back to Brenda to talk about what you all, the AAR, can actually do to help influence this change.
Thank you, Palmer. So obviously, because you are the tie that keeps all stakeholders communicating with each other, you have a responsibility to realign the industry actions with these values. As we go forth, these cultural standards that we talked about in our three-pronged solution, we want them to be requirements to belong to the AAR. So going through why the AAR can do this, looking forward, currently you have the intermodal interchange rules that set operational standards for these railways. For railway cars, they have to make sure that they pass inspection based on the standards that you set, or else they cannot switch tracks with another rail carrier. And the reason this is so important is that they ultimately can't get to their final destination if they're not following those operational standards. So all we're asking you to do is add the cultural standards to this requirement so that they're doing the same things, making sure that they are going through and following your rules.
All right, so how they can actually implement this, we'll start really quickly with costs. For you, the AAR, it'll cost about $3.4 million, which breaks down into a price increase of your member dues of $530,000. That one total will cost railroads around $77 million a year, but when you put that in context of what East Palestine cost, that was $1.2 billion or greater. So it's really not that big of a number. Then, in terms of timeline, we're really focused on this idea of change management. We want to start by implementing these rules, working and creating memorandums of understanding, going throughout the process, and eventually continuing to evaluate safety culture. Now, the key takeaways from today, we would like you all, the AAR, to create culture standards to influence your people and your process, to create a full safety equation that will take a disaster in East Palestine that looks like this and make sure that railways operate and look like this, safe and efficient. Thank you. How close is that?
Okay, your one question will come from Mr. Jerry Zack.
Identify 6 tangible actions the rail industry could support to regain trust in communities such as East Palestine, Ohio.
Specific policy changes that the industry can make directly in response to East Palestine. We would start off by really going back to that idea of stakeholders. Who are the key groups that we can work with? First, we would want to address the civilians and the people who are affected in the area. One opportunity there is to clean up the damage that was done in East Palestine or future problems like this that may occur in the industry. 2 is to then work with first responders in the area. So how can we train them to better respond? 3, we would want to then work with the industry to create better standards moving forward. 4, we would then want to spend time talking with the actual railroad companies to create better culture. All right. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Another round of applause for all 5 of our teams. I gotta tell you, it's not easy to take a 20-minute presentation, go back there for a half an hour, and chop half of it out, and still make it clear and meaningful. And so there was a lot of stress, and you guys all did a terrific job with that. So kudos to all of you. So here's how it's going to work. I'll give you the brief overview, then Paul has a few words to say, and then we'll get out of here. So, judges,
When we get out of here, the judges will go up the stairs and across the atrium back to room 208, which is directly across the atrium, and Paul and I will go in there as the group will deliberate. Everyone else, please head out to the atrium after we're done here and hang out. As soon as we're done with the judges' deliberations, we'll start our final ceremony out of the atrium with our recognition of all of our prizes and awards and everything like that. So that's the agenda for the rest of this night. Just stick around and we're going to get you out of here as soon as we can. So I'll turn it over to Paul for some closing remarks.
Sure. Just real quickly for the students that are here, don't forget you got the QR code outside the door. It's active now, so you can go ahead and activate that and fill out the survey. We want to make sure
Judges, you're actually going to room 120, so we're going to go out this door instead.
We're all ready for you.
Okay, good. So go to room 120. I was just going to say, let us get you over there and not talk to anybody. I know it's real tempting.
We're going to escort you through the secret passage.
Once we have the judges come back, we'll have all of our placements, and then our judges will probably, and our students and faculty advisors will want to talk a little bit about these things. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a little while.
For the finalist teams, if you brought a flash drive, they're right here on the table. Come grab it.
Sorry, I was trying to read your lips and then I was like, I know.